Thousands of medieval travelers crossed Europe's vast forests without carrying a single map, yet many still reached their destinations.
Dense canopies swallowed familiar landmarks, where one wrong decision could slowly become a struggle for survival.
So how did experienced travelers find the correct direction when every tree seemed almost identical to the last?
Instead, they learned to read something far older, far larger, and far more reliable than parchment ever could. As daylight slowly returned, the forest itself began revealing the first clues to anyone patient enough to notice them. They observed the shape of valleys, the direction of flowing water, and where the morning sun first touched the trees. Even the smallest details beneath their feet often revealed far more than the horizon ever could.
Even the smallest details beneath their feet often revealed far more than the horizon ever could.
Birds often revealed what human eyes could not, long before a traveler ever noticed the difference. Experienced travelers often stopped completely, allowing the forest to speak before taking another step. Moving carefully, they rarely walked for long without stopping again to compare every clue the forest offered. Gentle slopes often led toward streams, where fresh water shaped both the land and every living thing around it.
One clue alone could be misleading, but several clues pointing together rarely were.
Direction came from agreement between the landscape, not from trusting any single sign alone.
Long before maps were drawn on parchment, the forest had already written its own. The forest was no longer an obstacle. It slowly became a map written in living patterns.
Different trees preferred different ground, quietly revealing changes that careful travelers learned to recognize.
Rock, soil, and water together formed boundaries invisible to most people, yet obvious to practiced eyes. Animal trails often crossed the landscape long before people ever followed them. The safest route was rarely the shortest. It was the one the forest had already approved. Sunlight itself became another guide, revealing which slopes welcomed warmth and which remained cool throughout the day. The oldest trees often marked the most stable parts of the forest, where the land had remained undisturbed for generations. Light itself revealed the architecture of the forest, showing where the canopy opened and where ancient woodland still remained unbroken. Light itself revealed the architecture of the forest, showing where the canopy opened and where ancient woodland still remained unbroken. Light itself revealed the architecture of the forest, showing where the canopy opened and where ancient woodland still remained unbroken. Eventually, every clue began pointing in the same direction, until the forest itself became impossible to misunderstand. The forest even recorded the passage of time upon its trees, if someone knew how to notice the difference.
Moss alone could never guide a traveler, but together with everything else, it became another trustworthy voice within the forest.
Roots, stones, and the shape of the ground often revealed where countless seasons had carried water before.
By then, the traveler no longer searched for a path. He simply listened as every part of the forest repeated the same answer. The forest spoke constantly, but only to those patient enough to notice its quietest voices. Animals left far more than footprints. Every meal, every nest, and every broken branch became another sentence within the forest.
The rarest signs were often human, yet even they only mattered when the forest confirmed them.
Birds often noticed distant changes long before people did, quietly announcing movements hidden deep within the forest.
Even the trees carried messages, marked year after year by animals following the same ancient routines.
Some paths disappeared beneath leaves every autumn, yet generations of footsteps continued shaping the forest long after the trail itself had vanished. Sometimes direction came not from what filled the forest, but from the empty spaces between its oldest trees. Even the smallest insects revealed invisible currents of air, helping experienced travelers understand how the forest breathed. Nothing truly disappeared inside the forest. Even fallen giants continued guiding the living landscape for centuries.
Invisible boundaries separated one forest community from another, and experienced travelers learned to recognize them without ever seeing a line.
The forest did not force travelers to follow a single route. It quietly suggested the easiest one.
Light itself became another compass, changing from tree to tree as the forest slowly turned toward the sun.
Long before water came into view, the forest quietly announced its presence through sound, air, and living things. No single clue ever guided the traveler. The forest itself became the map because every living part agreed with every other. Long before water came into view, the forest quietly announced its presence through sound, air, and living things. When sunlight faded beneath gathering clouds, many familiar signs became uncertain, forcing travelers to trust experience more than certainty. Even the sounds of the forest could become misleading, because changing weather altered the voices travelers had trusted all morning. The oldest trees often marked the most stable parts of the forest, where the land had remained undisturbed for generations.
Experienced travelers rarely waited for rain itself. They watched the sky until the forest confirmed what the clouds had already begun.
Shelter was never chosen after rain began. Wise travelers searched while the forest still remained calm. The first warning was rarely a raindrop. It was the moment every small change finally began agreeing with the sky.
The first raindrops almost never reached the ground immediately. Ancient forests delayed the storm one layer at a time. Soon the ground itself began changing, reminding travelers that every step became part of the forest's response to rain. Rain changed more than the ground beneath their feet. It transformed the entire language of the forest. The forest never became dangerous all at once. Each wet stone and hidden root quietly demanded greater attention than before. Streams that had quietly guided travelers could quickly change after rain, turning familiar crossings into uncertain ground. In medieval forests, survival often depended less on moving faster than on knowing when to stop, observe, and wait. No map could preserve knowledge that changed with every season. It survived only through people who learned directly from the forest itself.
Most of this knowledge was never written in books, because the forest itself changed faster than ink ever could.
A child could inherit a map in a single afternoon. Learning to read a forest often required an entire lifetime. Across medieval Europe, this knowledge survived because every generation quietly taught the next, where the forest was willing to lead them.
Modern maps could show where a forest stood. They could never teach someone how to understand what the forest was saying.
Perhaps medieval travelers were never better at finding their way. They simply noticed far more than most people notice today. The forest had never hidden the way. It had always been speaking through water, trees, wind, and light. The greatest map medieval travelers carried was never drawn on parchment. It was written slowly inside memory by the forest itself. Those who survived these forests understood one simple truth. The forest was never conquered. It was respected. For medieval Europe, forests were never empty wilderness. They were living worlds that rewarded patience and punished certainty.
Perhaps the greatest lesson medieval forests offered was that survival began with paying attention long before danger appeared.
Long after the travelers were forgotten, the forests continued teaching the same lessons to every generation willing to observe.
Perhaps that is why so few medieval travelers ever claimed to master the forest. They spent their lives learning from it instead.
Even today, those ancient forests still whisper the same quiet lessons to anyone patient enough to listen.